Hi team, welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about actually a question that came through on our community about bokeh and how to create essentially beautiful blurry backgrounds. So the question came about because this particular person wanted to learn how to create more blurry backgrounds, and that's essentially what we're talking about when we're talking about bokeh, is how blurry our backgrounds are and the quality of that blur and all that kind of jazz. So today's video is hopefully going to be helping to address this issue. And of course, guys, remember that if you guys have any questions about things that you'd like to know, you're always welcome to submit your questions to us as well. I love doing these little videos. They're super fun, super helpful, and they're a great way to keep you guys engaged and hopefully help you with your learning. So let's dig into this. So bokeh, what is it? Okay, so essentially what it is, when we're talking about bokeh, we're talking about our blurry backgrounds. Okay, so to create a blurry background, we hopefully remember, that we need three things that go into making a beautiful blurry background. The first one is our f-stop, or our aperture. The second thing is how close we are to our object. And the third thing is how far our object is from the background. So we're going to cover each of these. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to walk you through a little bit of what each of these elements mean. I'm going to talk you through some of the reasons you might want to buy a more expensive lens for this, and also some of the tips and tricks that you can do with exactly the lens that you have at your disposal, so that you don't have to go out there and buy thousands upon thousands worth of expensive camera equipment. Now, I am cheating a little bit because today I am starting with my kit. So this is my D750, it's an Icon. Strapped on front here right now, I have my 35mm f1.4. Okay, and the other lens that I'm going to be using today is actually my 50mm 1.8. Okay, now fear not, I know it doesn't sound probably a lot like a lot of the lenses that you guys have in your kit, and that's okay because we're going to talk about that. But these lenses will be able to help me demonstrate all of the pieces that I need as we go. Also, my fabulous models today are Elephant 1 and Elephant 2. Thank you guys for joining us. It's nice to have you on board. And you guys at home can practice this based on sort of whatever you have available to you as well. All right, so let's dig into this, guys. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk about step number one. Now, step number one in all of this is our f-stop, right? So the lower the f-stop, the smaller the bokeh. That's the smaller of our depth of field. So when we have a very small depth of field, right, it means that the part of our photo that is in focus is very small, okay, which means that everything before and after it is blurry, right? So when we're going for the best depth of field, we're going for the smallest depth of field for our blur, right? So to create this, the first thing that goes into it is a small f-stop. So I want to show you guys just how much of a difference our f-stop actually makes to this. And you guys might be fairly surprised to learn. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a photograph with this 35mm 1.4 on, but I'm going to take this photograph at around about 3.5, okay? Actually, I'm going to do it at 5.6, and I'll tell you why. So for a lot of you, you're going to have kit lenses that came with your camera, and these kit lenses are generally something like an 18 to 55mm, and the f-stop on the kit lenses is 3.5 to 5.6. Why, you say? Why is there a range? Okay. Well, what happens is that at your widest angle at 18mm, your aperture can open all the way to 3.5. But as you zoom in, your aperture can only open as wide as 5.6. Now I'm going to take this photograph at 5.6 just so that we can have a look and see the difference between how much of a difference our aperture makes in this setting. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this photo at 5.6. Now guys, I'm shooting indoors today, right? And it's not exactly the sunniest day here in Grand Old Calgary. So one of the things that I do need to keep in mind is that making sure that my shutter speed is fast enough. To do that, because I'm messing about with my aperture, I'm actually just going to increase my ISO a little bit, all right? So for me in here, I'm going to be shooting at about ISO 1000, right? And that should give me enough shutter speed to get the photo of my dreams here. So this is what this photograph looks like with an aperture of 5.6. Perfect. Borderline fast enough, but pretty much there. All right, now I would like for you guys to have a look at the same photograph now, but at 1.4. Right, and let's take a look at the difference between these two. It's a pretty huge difference, right? You guys can see just how much blurrier my second photograph is at 1.4 than my first photograph is at 5.6. That's a huge difference between the two of them, right? Very cool. So that in its essence is probably the fastest and easiest way. It's probably also the most expensive way that we can create better depth of field, is to decrease our f-stop. But there are other things that go into creating beautiful blurry backgrounds. So what are they? Well, the first thing that goes into creating a beautiful, the second thing that goes into creating a beautiful blurry background is how close I am to my subject. Now, the reason that I have a 35mm here and a 50mm here is so that I can test this theory, okay? 35mm is wider than a 50mm. Now, my 50mm is only a 1.8. So to make sure that I'm comparing these photos properly, I'm actually going to set my f-stop on this lens to 1.8 and take a photo like that. So setting my f-stop to 1.8. Perfect. So this is my photograph with my 35mm. Now I am going to switch my lenses over. So if you guys don't have a prime lens, you guys have a zoom lens, then you guys can just zoom in. It's a lot easier than having to switch your lenses around, granted. Okay. And now let's take a look at the same photograph, but this time I'm going to zoom in. Also at 1.8, so let me just make sure I'm there. Great. All right, so same photo now at 1.8, but zoomed in to 50mm. Perfect. So that's pretty amazing, guys. You guys can see the huge difference between 1.8 at a wider angle as opposed to 1.8 when we zoom in, right? Now, these are not the same composition because zooming in does change the composition of your photograph, right? But when I zoom in, if I'm really going for those blurry backgrounds, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. And this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a zoom lens, right? What you guys can do is you guys can simply step forward, okay? So I have prime lenses, they don't zoom. So when I want to zoom, I literally have to be the zoom. Now, just one thing to keep in mind is that all of our lenses will have what's called a minimum focal distance. So if you guys can hear this on the lens here, essentially when I get too close, my camera, oh, no, not yet. When I get too close, my camera isn't going to be able to focus anymore. Okay, now sorry, not my camera, my lens isn't going to be able to focus anymore. So each of our lenses have a very different minimum focal distance. So if you're getting so close that your lens can't focus, you just need to sit back a little bit, or step back a little bit until you hear that beep, and then you're good to go. All right, so that is the second thing that we can try to create beautiful blurry backgrounds. So now, there is a third thing again. And for this third thing, I have actually roped in the help of some very pretty lights from my daughter's room. She likes these lights. They're blue. All right. So the third thing now is how close my subject is to the background. So if I'm going to assume I'm putting some lights in my background, I want to test out the difference between having the lights nice and close to my elephants, right, so up here, versus having my lights further back, all right? So I'm going to reposition this so you guys can see. So my lights initially, see if we can get the ugly box out of the way. My lights initially are going to be right up in between my elephants there. And you guys can see how almost exactly on the same plane as my elephants, right? So this would be equivalent to taking a photograph of your shoes on the floor and expecting your shoes to blur out. So same setup here, I'm going to take this at 1.8, all right? But you guys can take it at whatever f-stop you're at. The exercise will work the same. So if you're shooting at 5.6, you will see more blur when you do this exercise, okay? So here we go, first photo. Perfect. All right, so we're getting a little bit of a blur on our lights there. But let's have a look at what happens when I do this. So I'm just moving my background away, or I'm moving my subjects forward, depending on which way you look at it. And when I do that, Oh, look at how much better the blur is on that photo, right? We get so much better blur on our lights, which are our background, when we create some distance between them. Now, remember our depth of field is distance related. So if we can play with our distances, we can bring our subjects closer, we can bring our backgrounds further away, right? That is going to help us to create better blur every single time. That's pretty cool stuff. So, the final thing that I want to say about backgrounds is this, because it's not just about the distance of the background, it's also about the quality of the background, okay? And by quality of the background, I mean essentially how busy is it? If you have a really busy background, what you're going to end up with is a photograph where the background stands out. Now, this might be what you're going for, but in all probability, if you're looking at getting better blur on your photographs, it might not be too. So, these photos that you've seen, I have been taking it in this direction, and obviously you guys can see in the back of my photos, there's some detail, there's interest, there's the window, there's all sorts of things in the background. Now, you might not be able to know exactly what they are, but they're there, trust me. And you can tell that in these photos. So what I have done is I've created kind of an artificial backdrop for ourselves over here. So this is just the blanket that I dragged off our couch. We have 2 dogs with black hair, so obviously it's like riddled with dog hair. But that's not the point. The point is that if we change our background, sometimes we can change our blur. So if I were to take a photograph similarly composed, but on a white background, or at least a plain textured background, let's take a look at the difference in these photos here. All right, awesome. Now, this white background is not the prettiest background I've ever seen. It's not exactly the nicest color. It kind of looks like it might be a little dirty. It is. The point of the matter is that when you create a solid background or a solid color, a solid texture, it really helps to create that sense that there is nothing in the background, okay? It reminds me of a photograph that we took of Charlotte way back when we were on a riverboat cruise in Myanmar. And I love this photo because there is nothing in the background, and it just brings attention to her so spectacularly that you literally cannot look at anything else because there's just nothing else there. Now, this photo was not photoshopped. It wasn't edited in any particular way, just maybe a little bit of an adjustment of the highlights, and that's it. Okay, but the point is that the photo was set up in such a way that there was nothing in the background, and that really helped to draw attention to our subject. Now, that is a compositional choice, right? Depends on what you're looking for, it depends on what you like, and it's not up to me to tell you how to run that. But if you're looking for more consistent, better quality blur on your background, try and pick a solid background or something that is just a simple texture, all right? For example, the green foliage of trees, right? That kind of thing. So, lots of really cool choices. Now, one extra thing that I want to test with you guys is this. I've never actually tested this before, so this is going to be a fun experiment for me as well. What I want to look at here is I want to look at choices. So for many of you shooting with our 3.5 to 5.6 lens, we have lots of choices to make, okay? What we could do is we could zoom out to our 18mm and have a lower f-stop of 3.5, which sounds like a pretty good choice because we know f-stop affects the quality of our photos, right? Or we could zoom in because we know that zoom also affects the quality of the background, but then we have a higher f-stop of 5.6. So what I want to do now is I want to see which one makes the biggest difference. I'm going to take 2 photographs here. I am going to take one photograph where I'm nice and close. I'm going to take one photograph where I'm further away from my elephants, and I'm going to use the f-stop of 3.5. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into my elephants. So I'm just going to bring my elephants closer. And I'm going to take a second photograph, but this time using an f-stop of 5.6. And I want you guys to help me figure out which one of these 2 photos you like better. Let's see. So, first photograph, zoomed out at 3.5. Okay. Make sure I'm properly zoomed out here. And also just remove all the extraneous things from my frame. Okay, so that's the kind of blur that we get when we zoom out at 3.5. Now, I'm going to zoom in. Come here, elephants. But I'm going to increase my f-stop to 5.6. Hold on. Awesome. Okay, so now that we get to compare those two photographs, what's your takeaway? I just have to think about it for a second because I know what my takeaway is. My takeaway is this. It doesn't matter quite so much as long as you're paying attention to all three elements. Okay? If you're not paying attention to all three elements when you do this, then obviously taking a photograph at 3.5 is going to be better than taking a photograph at 5.6. But if you're paying attention to all three parts of this equation, how low your f-stop is, how close you are to your subject, and how far your subject is from your background, then it's not going to make an enormous difference, right? So, tip for you guys, shooting with lenses that you cannot control your f-stop quite to the same extent that I can here. Make sure you're paying attention to the extra pieces. It's not just about your f-stop. It is also about how close you are to your subject, how far your subject is from your background, and what kind of background you're using. So I really hope that this helped you guys figure out a few things about your blurry backgrounds. And I hope now that you guys have some tools in your toolkit to go out there and experiment with this. And of course, please don't forget to share those photos so that we can all have a look. If you have any questions about why something isn't working or how to make something look better, again, share away. You know what? We are always happy to help. And whenever you have other photography questions come up, please don't hesitate to email us as well. We are always happy to put together something like this to help you guys on your photography journey. Until next time.